Well, we still have with us in the studio Mr. Salih Al-Hassan, Secretary General, Miyetti ala Kautal Hore, and we also have with us Usman Baba Ingelzama, who is the Secretary General, Miyetti ala Cattle Breeders Association of Nigeria. Well, just before we went on break, you were saying, Mr. Al-Hassan, that your group has been vindicated with all that is going on, especially in Benue State. But when we look at what is happening across the country, and when we look at what is happening in Plateau, you talked about Mambila and how people were killed, especially Fulani people were killed massively in Taraba State. But when we also look at what is happening, say, in Zamfara, in Plateau, in Benue, for instance, even in Taraba, some parts of Taraba, Adamawa, what we always hear is that this crisis, this conflict is between farmers and herders. And in the wake of it, we've seen many people losing their lives. Can you tell us if this is really, from your own reading, is this really this conflict between farmers and herders, or is something else happening here?
You see, the dynamics of the conflict varies from location to location. If you take the case of Zamfara, for example, you have pure banditry taking place there. It was created by the state government. They institutionalized vigilantism and outsourced the security of the rural areas to vigilantes. And now they have grown monsters in the rural areas. And who are the first victims of these bandits? They are the herders who own cows. But we must differentiate between bandits and innocent pastoralists that rear cattle. If you don't have cows, you don't have herd of cattle, you shouldn't be called a herdsman or a Fulani herdsman. You are purely a criminal, a bandit, and you should be treated as such. And criminality should not carry an ethnic identity. Just
a moment. Can you tell us a bit more what you mean by the state government has grown a monster?
Yes.
What happened? How did the vigilantes morph into becoming monsters?
In 2014, I was part of a high-level security peace committee instituted by the then Inspector General of Police. We went and spent 1 week in Zamfara. What we found out there was the state government created vigilantes and armed them. And those vigilantes are predominantly from the farming communities. So they started visiting mayhem on the pastoralist communities, killing them, displacing them completely from most of the villages in Zamfara. And you now have another group of vigilantes now rose up among the herders. The two groups now became going into conflict, and both groups now have become criminals.
Okay, so what you have is actually a conflict between vigilantes belonging to farmers and vigilantes belonging to herders in Zamfara State.
Absolutely, that is what I have.
What do we have in Plateau State, for instance?
What we have in Plateau State is an agenda by an ethnic group to expel the herders on the plateau. It has been there for over 15 years. I schooled in the plateau, I grew there. I'm very familiar with the crisis. There is no Fulani family on the plateau, particularly in Riom, Barikinladi, Jos South, Jos North, that don't have a victim of Birom genocidal act. We have taken them to ECOWAS court.
So
they have killed over 5,000 Fulani pastoralists. You see what you have on the plateau is clear case of an agenda to exterminate an indigenous pastoralist community on the plateau.
Mr. Al-Hassan, I'm going to come in here because, yes, we know that there are these various groups, like you mentioned, bandits, herdsmen, farmers. Now, is it not unfair to reality to suggest that somehow it's only bandits that are causing some of the mayhem that we're seeing around the country, or it's only, vigilantes, or whatever the case may be, when in fact there has been, indisputable evidence that indeed normal herdsmen have been kind of militarized, weaponized, and have been, whether it's out of defense or out of offense, have been killing innocent farmers along their cattle routes. Can you completely write off that reality?
You see, I want you to understand the context. If you are faced with total breakdown of law and order, if you have a Hobbesian state of nature where might is right, self-preservation becomes a natural instinct. Today, the herders in the rural areas, they don't enjoy any form of security. Rustlers will come, invade their communities, rustle their cattle with sophisticated weapons. So what do you expect them? They must try as much as possible to defend what is left of their only means of livelihood. And at the same time, you see that if they try to defend themselves, the whole narratives are being changed upside down. In fact, take the case of the Plateau State, for example. Is it a trespass on land? If you take the case of Zamfara, is it trespass on land? You see, it's pure aggression. There is an agenda to make sure there is a criminalization of cattle rearing in this country. And that agenda is, it has its drivers. You have hate speech advocates, you have promoters of hate speech, you have organizations that are promoting this conflict. Look at the Middle Belt Forum, for example. Go and read the speech of the immediate late president of Middle Belt Forum, Bala Takai, when he took over. Go through that speech. Clearly preaching hate speech. That set the tone for the conflict.
Mr. Al-Hassan, you've made public claims that this is a kind of a genocidal mission against Fulani herdsmen. Now, when you make such statements, you're referring to the Middle Belt Forum, but when you make such statements, are you not encouraging those of your members who have been weaponized to essentially do the reverse of what you're saying is being done to them?
You see, let me state it clearly here. Our members don't carry weapons. Okay. I ought to state it clearly. You must differentiate between bandits, criminal elements, kidnappers,
but then
from
what is the
cattle
self-preservation you're talking about then? If you're saying that they're not weaponized, what is the self-preservation you're referring to?
In most communities, when they are faced with attack, they try to defend themselves. In most cases, they don't succeed. In most cases, they lose everything, all their belongings. Today, look, if you go to Benue, you pity the pastoralists. They have been totally expelled from Benue State. They are refugees in Nasarawa State. At the same time, the state government is using state apparatus to kill them. Just last week, they killed 6 innocent herders, shot 150 cows in Kiana early in the morning for no reason. So you see, they are preparing the mind of the state. When they fail in using their local militia and tribal hordes to displace the herders, they now want to criminalize cattle rearing so that the state will be used against the herders. That is why we are shouting. Today, why you see that they are against our organization is because we have refused to be compromised. So if we cannot be compromised, we must blackmail so that nobody here, the pastoralists, have a voice. So it must be understood clearly that, look, there are challenges between farmers and herders that borders on land resource conflict. Those land resource conflicts should be addressed through a sustainable land use policy, which we now have encapsulated in the new National Agricultural Development Plan. That plan, if it is implemented faithfully without deceit, it will address all these challenges that has to do with farmers-herders conflict. But the agenda that they will expel the herders, particularly from North Central land, should be perished because they are an indigenous mobile population. They didn't come from anywhere.
We'll go to Lagos now, where I believe my colleagues have another guest.